So it does happen. The first answer is it does happen. So here's a nice example, and it says something about, actually it's an interesting example. So turns out that the way it works in Nigeria, I don't actually give you money. I don't actually give you money when something bad happens to you. What do I do? I loan you money, and in particular, if you are expected to pay me back, I ask for less payback. If I'm expected to pay you back, I pay you more than what I was supposed to owe you. So it's like, think of usually interest contracts tend to be completely inflexible, right? I pay back my mortgage is whatever 5.4%. I pay 5.4% every year till the mortgage is paid. That's not what credit looks like in Nigeria. In these villages, he found that the interest rate itself is very flexible. So I pay more than what I owed, in some sense, when the interest rate is when you are doing badly, and I pay less than what I owed when you're doing well. That's a way to provide insurance, but it goes through this cover of a loan.
How do they determine if someone has an adverse shock?
Okay.
Word of mouth.
Perfectly good question. We'll come back. Let's come back to that. I want to spend a minute before we get to that question on a more basic question, which is, why do you think they do this? What's different about? So why do you think that they go through this loan mechanism? So then what they seem to be doing is giving you, paying you more on your loan when you do badly, and paying you less on your loan when the payer is doing badly. Why does that make any sense? What could be driving that structure? Yeah.
Because they know that later on when they'll probably be doing badly, that they'll get paid and that it'll help them.
But why don't they just give them money? Why through the loan? The question here I'm asking is, why is it that I give you a discount on your loan rather than just handing you some cash? What is that pointing to?
Like a desire to feel, or I guess that's almost like a desire not to feel like you're giving a handout. So
one possibility is that it's sort of a cover, right? That's an interesting idea. It's a cover for I'm giving you the money, but it's not so much that people are not seeing that I'm handing you some cash. They're seeing that I actually am paying you some money back for a loan. So in that sense, it's a cover, but it's not clear that that's maybe everybody else also knows that you're poor. It's not so clear that it's so hard. I think what you're saying is related to what they're saying, which is that one thing that about a loan is that a loan suggests that using the loan suggests that if this is making use of a pre-existing financial relationship. So an ongoing relationship. The difference between my giving you money seems to be mostly that, in a sense, these are people who already had a financial relationship. So it's the case that a lot of these people either one owes the other one money already, and adjusting the terms of that suggests that it's not so much. So in other words, it's not clear that what this isn't telling us is simply that the people who have these transactions are already people who've had a stock against each other. So it's not the case that, so it's you keep count and say, it's not clear. So instead of thinking of this as being, the loan as being a separate financial product, one way to think about it is that, we keep accounts. And, I've done you 5 favors, you've done me 3 favors. And the net is 2 favors. And the loan amount really reflects our netting out of those favors. So we keep, so in other words, what is nice about a loan is it's a net, either I owe you or you owe me. It's a net accounting device for keeping track of who's done how many favors. So by thinking of it in loan terms, it creates a natural framework for thinking about this as a kind of a social accounting device. I keep track. How do I keep track of, like, maybe people also say, well, I did you 7 favors and you've done me 1. I have heard people actually say things like that. So, the same psychology, it's a good way to keep track. Thinking of it in terms of loan makes it clear that what you're trying to do is keep track of an ongoing relationship. It's a stock. I gave you 100, you paid me back 50, then I gave you 30, then you gave me 200, and when I add those up, every stage, what I really care about is not how many times what happened, but the net amount you owe me. And that's a good way to account for the relationship. So we can keep track of, am I someone who owes you, or are you someone who owes me, by sort of counting that amount. And that way we don't need to keep track of all these other numbers, whether it was 20 once and 15 another time. It's just one number which is kind of measures our collective obligation. And so one advantage of that might be that it kind of summarizes, my status in the collective system. So it may be that, everybody knows I owe you 50, and so and then nobody will want to lend me much more because it looks like I'm just somebody who takes money from everybody and never gives them. So it's a good way to keep track of whether there's someone who's sort of trying to beat the system. But there's another maybe less, even simpler reason why you may want. But in some ways, I think there's an even simpler reason why you may want to keep track of it, which is simply, it may well be that I just vis-a-vis someone else, he may want to know, how many times has this guy taken from me? And I may want to just put a limit to that because I know that at some level I'm going to die in 20 years or something. And so I'm going to say, look, if it's reciprocity, so that the reason I'm giving him is X, that he will pay me back eventually, then I want to know whether it's reasonable to expect that he will, I'll get enough back from him. So if I think that basically the reason why I'm giving him the money is because he will eventually, give me back the money when I need it, well, if my future is 20 years and I've given him, $5 million, I'm unlikely to get that much back. So I want to know roughly where I am in that transaction because that's the only way that I can kind of make a rational decision about whether it's worth continuing. I mean, if he owes, so I want to, if my reason for being in the relationship is that I also think that I'm going to get some favors from him, then knowing how much he already owes me is a way to keep track of, how much can I reasonably expect to get back from him? If that number is already way past anything then I don't need to give him extra favors to get more back. At some level, I'm just not going to be able to collect. So if there's some kind of a rational, so I might want to limit my exposure to him because in some sense I know that it is never going to pay off to invest so much in a particular person. So it might be a useful accounting device. So I think that the Chris Udry, who came up with this, who did this study, his interpretation very much was this, that they're keeping track of, how much they owe each other. That everybody knows roughly, I owe this guy this much, which is within reasonable limits. It's not too much, and therefore, I can expect to get it back eventually.